Senior Research Fellow at Africa-Asia Dialogues Thembisa Fakude joins us now to share some insights on this developments. Thembisa, very good evening to you. Perhaps we should just start with what philosophy informs the Taliban's decision to basically disempower women in every level of self-development or advancement.
The Taliban follows a very strict interpretation of Islam known as the Salafist interpretation of Islam, which is very, very strict, similar to that which is followed by the majority of the people in Saudi Arabia. And it's unfortunate, of course, that it has led to the situation where women are barred from going to school, and now we hear that those that were already attending university will not be returning to university after their winter holidays. So it is a strict form of Islam called the Salafist interpretation of Islam, and this is what they follow.
And are you able to just explain a little bit more about the text, what it says, and why you say it's open for interpretation?
Well, it covers a very wide variety of issues, and for one to understand its strictness, you'll have to zoom into one particular what is known as fatwa in Islam. So you'll have a liberal position or a much more moderate position in interpretation, for example, on some of the Muslim or Islamic interpretation on regarding women going to school in countries like South Africa, for example. Women are allowed to go to school because there is a certain what is known as the madhab in terms of the school of thought of understanding certain Islamic interpretation. And South Africa follows a much more, even though of course we do have the Salafists in South Africa, but there are various forms of schools of thought or interpretation in terms of trying to understand Islam, and those, of course, depending on the countries, the Middle East tend to have a much more stricter forms of interpretation of Islam, whereas you'll find countries like Indonesia, South Africa, Turkey have got a much more moderate interpretation of Islam. So it depends on where you are, and also depends on the governance. We know that there are very few Islamic countries in the world, and therefore most interpretation of Islam will have to fall within the laws of specific countries that they operate from. But in countries such as Afghanistan, Iran, Saudi Arabia, where these countries are Muslim countries, you'll find that this interpretation inform the constitution of those countries and the governance of those countries.
So for those seeking to understand the thinking behind it, I mean, education is a human right, it's a basic human right. What is the viewpoint of the Taliban through that religious lens of women as members of society, the status they enjoy? Why is taking education away from them in line with the social order which they want to create?
Well, it's part of this prevailing conservatism that we're currently experiencing around the world. So the rationale behind the Taliban's position is that if you allow women to go to school and get educated, you'll be encouraging some sort of lewdness from women, and women will start, not respecting their husband, and as a result, you'll be introducing some sort of what's known as fitna or immorality within the community. And this is the rationale behind the decision why they don't allow women to go to school. It's basically undermining of women's capability of making independent decisions, and they truly believe that if you empower women and allow women to earn their own living, that will encourage them to be loose, that will encourage them to go and do or practice certain immoral acts within the societies. So it's a very archaic, backward way of thinking. Follows, as I've said earlier on, this conservatism that is currently prevailing around the world. It's not only the Taliban, by the way. You have a lot of these people in the United States, in Israel, in Saudi Arabia, Iran, who really do not believe that women are capable of making their own independent decisions. And if you do empower women, you're basically going to be encouraging immorality within your society.
And given the fact that women, they are forbidden from practicing law, from being judges, no doubt there can be no pushback to this. And I say this because the writ said that women will be stopped from going to university until further notice, but it sounds to me like a permanent situation for as long as they are in power.
Yeah, I mean, one wonders why you even come up with this kind of decision. To what extent is this impeding the governance in Afghanistan? Why is it so urgent that we're going to have the Taliban coming up with this new law? And I think there could be a possible pushback if these countries that are currently supporting the Taliban through aid, particularly those countries from the Middle East, specifically in the Gulf countries, that will help put pressure on the Taliban, because I don't think there's anything else that can assist at the moment, because these are individuals who do not watch television, don't read newspapers, don't go on internet. They are not participating online. So they are totally out of touch with their reality. And they don't really seem to care how the world is moving and what is the rule of law, international law. They don't even know what that is. So it's a big problem. And the only way you can prevent and push back this kind of decision is if you impact them where it had most, which is their purse. And at the moment, the only channel through which they're getting funding is through this aid that comes from the Middle East, specifically from the Gulf countries.
And Afghan prospects as a whole in general, Thembisa, what are they? There are reports suggesting that the deprivation is across the board. The quality of life has deteriorated since the Taliban's takeover. What is the current situation? Because I'm just thinking, if you deprive women of their basic human rights, there's no way that society in total cannot go unaffected.
Well, the current situation in Afghanistan is very dire. The Americans have decided to withhold some of the assets, including billions of US dollars belonging to Afghan people because of the Taliban. And by the way, we're talking about Kabul here. We're not really talking about Afghanistan. If you travel outside Kabul, the situation is even much more dire. There's no discussion about women going to school in some of the rural areas of Afghanistan. It's a given that they're not allowed to go to school. So the pushback on modernization and allowing girls and women to go to school is happening in the main city, which is the capital city of Afghanistan, in Kabul, and the rest of the country, there's no discussion. So the situation is extremely dire, and all the reforms and the political reforms that we've been talking about are only happening in Kabul. Other places of Afghanistan, the situation remains. The Taliban controls and rules with the power of the gun, and many people are subjected to the violence and oppression of the Taliban. And until that changes, I don't think that you are likely to see economic or socio-political development in Afghanistan.
Well, then, thank you so much for that. Thembisa Fakude is Senior Research Fellow at Africa-Asia Dialogues, speaking to us about the situation for women in particular in Afghanistan being barred even by armed militias from entering universities.